It's kind of exciting to think that on the other side of the screen, all kinds of people are joining us today. We're so thankful that you're joining us today. But we also realize that on the other side of the screen, it's not just a bunch of different people, it's actually also a diversity of feelings. But it's not just this crisis, this pandemic that brings up these emotions. Life is ripe with experiences that raise up anxiety or depression or doubt or confusion in us. And so unless you are somebody who has never experienced those emotions, this series is perfect for you. You need it, and I need it. I don't know if you played a game that I played when I was a kid called Chutes and Ladders. I learned recently from the Great British Baking Show that our friends in the UK have a version called Snakes and Ladders, and that sounds far more dangerous. But our version, the one I played, was called Chutes and Ladders. And just in case you're not familiar, the basic idea of the game, the way it's played, is you progress forward in these squares. And if you land on a square at the base of a ladder, it sort of quantum leaps you forward in the game. But if you land on one of those squares at the top of a slide or a chute, you fall back and you lose a lot of the progress that you've made previous to that. I don't know if you're like me, but if you are, then you love it when life is a series of steady progression with the occasional burst of awesome, like you hit a ladder. Like Katie and I are doing really well, and then we get to go on a vacation together. Or maybe, I'm exercising and I'm eating right, and all of a sudden those pants fit a little differently. Or I'm not losing breath the way I used to when I take my dog on a long walk. Maybe I'm progressing steadily in my career, in my profession, and then a new opportunity opens up. Some way that I can add value opens up to me. You know what those moments are like in life where you're plugging along, one foot in front of the other, and things might even be relatively stable, and then boom, something happens, and you have to share it with everybody. And it's the kind of news, those kind of moments where when you share it, you have to use like the praise hands emoji, or like that lady that's dancing sideways with the red dress. Maybe we can add that little graphic as on the screen here. Everybody wants to live just a constantly #blessed life. But I've lived enough life, you've lived enough life to know that life is also full of moments where you hit the top of a slide or a chute, or as our friends across the pond call it, you hit a snake. And you have a sudden setback or a sudden loss. And life does not feel like it's giving. It actually feels like something is being taken from us. But I've also started to learn at this point in my life that those moments of loss are actually opportunities for God to do his deepest and most enduring work in us. Yeah, like right in the middle of the betrayal, and in the middle of the divorce, and in the middle of the diagnosis, in the middle of the death, in the middle of someone moving away or someone moving out, in the middle of this season, in the middle of sheltering in place. This is great soil in which God could plant some of his deepest strength and hope and resolve in your life, but we have to open ourselves up to it. We have to be available for it. You might be making the most of this. There might even be parts of this season of our world that you're enjoying. Maybe you're seeing and appreciating the benefits it's bringing to our cultures or to our climate, but everybody's experiencing some sort of loss right now. And I want us to be honest about that. It's the kind of loss that nobody would have chosen. Nobody's going to go out of their way to experience, and yet here it is. And it feels like a thief because it's taken away from us. It's taken away something that we used to have or used to experience or enjoy, and it is probably not going to give it back. As much as we may want it or not want it, the world is never going to return to what it exactly was before this crisis hit, before this pandemic. But in this, right now, we don't want to be flippant or ignorant or dishonest about what it feels like sometimes, the tension that brings up in our lives, because all of us as a humanity know what loss feels like. It brings us right to those moments where we cry out, "Where are you, God? Do you care? Can you see me?"
If you're getting any value out of this video, make sure to click that subscribe button because there's so much more where this came from. And also by simply liking and commenting, you're bringing value to other people's lives by making this content more available to them. We have lots of topics from how to find your purpose, fighting anxiety and depression, or how to have healthier relationships. There's so much in there. And you could find all of this for free by simply exploring the Radius channel.
Hey, real quick, if you're new this week, this part isn't for you. Just skip forward, ignore this. If you're new, we just want you to receive. But if you're someone who calls Radius your home and want to give where your heart is, text Radius LA to 77977, or just go to the website, radius.church/give, and there are several ways your generosity can help make a difference. Now let's jump back in.
Chutes and ladders was first invented in 1943, but the pain of losing ground is as old as our species, as old as our human species. So I want to go way, way back to actually the first installment, the oldest book written that we have collected in the Jewish scriptures, or what some of us call the Old Testament. Now, you might think it's Genesis, because if you open up a Bible or you open up the Torah, the very first book that you'll come to is Genesis. But the oldest book, as far as we know, written and contained in those scriptures is the book of Job. It's the journal, the biography of a man named Job. And just fun fact, I actually was in a band in college called Full-Time Job. You want to talk about grieving. We should all grieve the fact that you're listening to a guy who once called his band Full-Time Job. And we would show up to shows and venues and they would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Full-Time Job," because that's how it was spelled. And we would have to get on the mic and the first thing we would say is "No, I'm sorry, it's actually Full-Time Job." Really was a horrible branding decision. And it's a surprise that nobody's ever heard of this band. But be that as it may, let me get back to the point. So Job is this biography of a man that lived long before any of us have. And the reason that I want to go way, way back to his story, thousands of years ago, is because here's a man who experienced more loss in his life than I hope any of us ever experience. This guy experienced 5 lifetimes of loss, really in a matter of months. And I want to see how he went through it and what God gave him in the midst of it. When we first are introduced to Job, he's really at a high. He has climbed ladder after ladder in life. He's extremely successful in his time and in his culture. He is the Jeff Bezos of his world. And on top of that, we're told that he's a man that is deeply devoted to God. He has integrity. He has a deep, abiding faith. He's a man that we could look up to in a lot of ways. And then, like the forces of heaven and hell come crashing down on this guy's life, and he loses almost everything in very short order. Loses his land, he loses his prominence and his wealth and success. He loses his 10 kids all at once. And it's in the midst of that we get to watch how he's engaging with this God who had given him so much and now seems nowhere to be found. We might look at that and say, God, how could you allow anybody to go through that? You might be thinking about some losses that you're seeing around you or pain people are going through around you and think, God, how could you allow that to happen? But the truth is, we all face that devastating kind of loss, because at the end of it all, for all of us, we ain't taking any of it with us. At the end of it all, this is a zero-sum game, that none of those things are going to be available to us as we step into eternity, at least not in the same way. We actually are not really surprised, or we really don't have a problem with loss. What we have a problem with is being the one living with the loss. We're okay if we are the one that the world loses. We just hate the concept. We hate the experience of being someone who lives with the loss, or somebody being forced to live with loss, right? And that's what Job had to experience. So I want to see his reaction to this. We see in Job chapter 1, starting in verse 20, Job stood up and he tore his robe in grief. And then he shaved his head, which I can totally identify with. And what this signals for us is that he is starting the Jewish practice of Shiva. Maybe you've heard of this before. It's a deep grieving process of sitting in the honesty of loss as the waves of grief roll over you. This man has just lost it all. He's just buried his 10 kids. Some of you might be able to empathize more closely than others with this, but I can't hardly imagine. I've been there in these moments of loss, of lives lost. Just in a few weeks, we're going to be celebrating 14 years since my friend Dalton passed away. And I had the tragic, beautiful, difficult privilege of being in the room when he took his last breath. And I was there with his closest family. And I can almost hear the wailing now. I could almost see, like it's right in front of me, how some members of his family just stood in silence. I certainly remember a few days later watching a young wife and mother bury her husband, and watching a mom and dad who reasonably would have thought that they would go before their kids bury their son. I've been in some of those moments of incredible loss and grief. I've experienced that. Job continues to do something kind of odd, though, at least at first. It says in the next sentence, then he fell to the ground to worship. Now, I don't know what your experience is with worship, but a lot of us, when we hear the word worship, we think that now's the time he started dancing and clapping and singing happy songs. That's not what this kind of worship looked like. This was the kind of worship that was screaming and weeping, God, how could you do this to me? And even that, we're told, is worship. He's not happy with the choices God has made or what God has allowed to occur, but he is acknowledging that God is more in control of the world than he is. He continues on. This is what his worship sounded like. The next sentence, he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord, Yahweh is the word he used there, gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name. More powerful is the name of the Lord. More powerful than mine, clearly. And then we're told, and I think this is helpful, in all this, Job did not sin by blaming God. We have permission, freedom. There's nothing wrong with this response. In his despair, he turned his attention to God, even if he wasn't happy with God. And I think this might be an opportunity for us in a world where a lot of times we fill our churches and our time together in churches just saying, God, I love everything that you do, and it's really, really comfortable for me, when we know that's not true. There are times when worship actually looks like, God, you are clearly more powerful. You clearly have ideas that I don't have in my head. I don't feel good about what you've done. I'm wrestling with you. And actually, that's one of the opportunities that we have in times of loss, is actually deepening our attachment with God, because sometimes that attachment starts with a wrestling match. And what I want you to think about right now, what I invite you to discover right now, is grieving well in the midst of loss can actually let us experience a greater intimacy with God than we thought we needed when we had more of what we wanted. Let me just say that again, because it's so important for us to get this. Grieving, if we grieve well, actually can give us a greater experience of intimacy with God, of a connection with God, of trust in God, than we thought we needed when we had more of what we wanted. Now, the rest of the book of Job just chronicles a man going further and further down into the depths of grief. And he gets real and he gets raw, but he's clutching to God the whole time. Maybe he's just hanging on by fingernails, but he's trying to pay attention to God the whole time. Now, this isn't the only way that people go through loss. We also see that example in Job's story. We're introduced to Job's wife, and we see how she's dealing with all this loss, because it hit her too. And instead of running towards God or screaming towards God, she's running away from him in the midst of that loss. And I don't blame her. I get why she would do that. At one point in her resentment, her resistance of God, she actually tells Job, here's some advice. Why don't you just curse God and die? I'm sure Job is thinking, thanks, sweetheart. That's really helpful. But whatever was going on in his head, here's actually what came out of his mouth in Job chapter 2, verse 10. Job replied, you talk like a foolish woman, which sounds really harsh, but he's saying, like, you know better than this. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? And again, so in all this, Job said nothing wrong. And what he's saying to her, and listen, what I'm going to say to some of us today is, come on, do we really expect it to work like God? As long as you are giving to me, I'm wide open. But the moment you take away from me or you take back something that I didn't earn to begin with, I'm done with you. Do we really expect life to just be a series of ladder after ladder after ladder? Well, we are left so vulnerable to devastation when we hit the square at the top of a chute, the top of a slide, and we experience not just the happy surprises of life, but the painful ones. Loss feels like a thief because it takes away from us. Think about the losses that you've endured just in this season alone. I mean, I know I've experienced some. I can only imagine what some of you have experienced. You've lost your job. Some of you just lost relational closeness, and it's eating you alive. 3 of the 4 members of my family are extroverts, and Zoom is a poor substitute for a hug and a high five. We've lost some of that. Some of you, even though you wanted it to be different, you lost a little bit of your waistline maybe in this one. You lost your vacation. Some of you, I'm sure you've lost a loved one. Maybe as a result of coronavirus, maybe just that as the natural course of life, and you weren't able to be as close or as connected as you wanted to be in the last moments of somebody's life. You've experienced loss. I'll tell you one that's real, and it might seem sort of pedestrian, but it's a loss I'm experiencing right now. During this unstructured time, I'll flip on my screen a little more often than normal, and Facebook is reminding me what life looked like 10 years ago and 20 years ago because of all these photos. And I'm reminded now of what my kids looked like when they were much littler. And I remember what my hairline looked like when I was much younger. This is getting real. A loss that I'm experiencing right now is the loss of the way life once was in a season I once lived through. Just a little bit ago, someone shared with me that they see my wife and I as a mother-father figure. This was an adult that said that to us. I am no longer, we are no longer that young couple, are we? You know, we are now the mom and dad couple. You know, I mean, Katie's like a hot young mom, but still, you get the point. Loss on any level is really just no longer having something that God has already given you. Let me reframe it because it's important. Loss is the experience of no longer having something that God already gave you. If you never had it in the first place, you wouldn't be experiencing the loss of never having it. So is it possible that by not going through the process of grieving that loss, of being honest about this expanse that is now created in your life, the gap that is created in your life, you might be even subconsciously led to the conclusion that God is done giving, that all the best things he wants to give have already been given and now some of them taken away. So our chance right now to move past that tension is to be honest about that loss, to be honest about the hole that it leaves in our lives so that we can become present to the new things that God wants to give us in that space, the new things that God wants to fill our life with. Before we moved our location as a church, we were meeting in this little storefront. For those of you who don't know, Radius is a church that's based in North Hollywood, California. And for quite a while, for a couple of years, we met in this storefront that we sort of customized, made work for us. And then the population of Radius grew that was gathering together. And then some other circumstances made it clear that we had to move. And we moved to an incredible high school just around the corner, much more space and much more opportunity. But with that opportunity came increased challenges. And there have been moments through this last season where we thought, why couldn't we just go back to where we were? Now, of course, coronavirus hit and all of us are sheltering in place. And I'm sure some of us are now saying, like, can we just go back to the high school that we were in? I would just love to go back to being together. But right before we moved into that high school, the leaders of Radius knew that we would have to grieve that change, even though some of us were excited about where we were going. So I took us through a teaching series for 4 weeks called Move. And you can actually go back and watch that on our website right now. And as a part of that teaching series, we went through a process of reflecting on the things that God had given us in the place we were about to leave. And the reason we did that, the reason we wanted to reflect on those things is because I want us to know that even though God was moving us into something different, God's character was not changing. And so the same God who wanted to give us so much in what once was is still prepared to give us so much in what is. That's what grief gives you. That process just continues on for months and months and months. It's going to continue on through the season that we're all living in, as we're trying to face this crisis together as a humanity, that we will have to reflect on a God who gave us so much, the pain of what it feels like to not have that anymore, but remember that the character of God is to continue to give us, maybe not the same, probably not the same, it's gonna be different, but he wants to give us more. See, loss doesn't have to feel like a thief if you can turn him into a resource. The way we like to think about grief, it's going to sound really trite at first, but it helps me remember what grief really is. Grieving is the habit of receiving from a season you are leaving. Again, I told you it was cheesy, but it might help stick in your mind. Grieving is receiving from a season you're leaving. Grief is the process of the present tense mining from the past tense. Receiving from what once was. But it's not going to work for us if we ignore that we are past what once was, if we ignore the loss, if we ignore the pain. Nope, I'm as young as I once was. No, you're not. Oh, if I, contort myself, then maybe they'll come back and they'll love me again. No, they won't. And if they did, you wouldn't want that kind of love. Oh, you know what? This crisis is just going to be over in a couple of weeks and then life will get back to normal. No, it won't. What once was no longer is. And we have an opportunity to grieve it. So let the waves of grief ebb and flow over your life. And some of you, you're familiar with these, right? There's that wave of denial, and some of you might be feeling that today. Like, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to get back to normal. Let that wash over you. That wave of bargaining. Like, if I just do the right thing, if I, adhere to the restrictions the right way, then we're going to be part of a solution and we're going to get back to normal as soon as possible. Or God, if I do this, if I behave for you this way, then finally you'll give me good things. If I lathered up enough karma, it's not going to happen that way, but let that wash over you. That anger, right? That's a part of grief. God, how dare you? Why would you? How could you? Experience that, feel that. Depression. I don't even want to get out of bed. I'm really struggling to have hope right now. Feel that. Be honest about that. As you go through that, also, you know that one of the feelings of grief that's going to wash through us is acceptance. All right. This is what is. I wouldn't have chosen it, but it's here. This is the process of leaving and grieving well. Don't avoid it. Don't deny it. Just let it happen. Loss is going to leave a big expanse in your soul. And if you ignore it, that expanse is going to be filled with all kinds of bad copies of what you used to have, right? And you know that's true. You might have been exposed to the influential book on trauma by a man named Bessel van der Kolk. And the book is called The Body Keeps the Score. It's actually a really informative work. That explores how traumatic events, abandonment, maybe sudden loss or emotional abuse actually leave their marks on our physicality, on our psychology. They actually leave marks in the circuitry of our brains. And so those things are called back to mind, not like a photo album, not like memories, but actually more like implicit memories that end up informing our attitudes and our decisions moving forward unless we're able to grieve through them and experience them fully. As we're fully integrated in all of the experiences we've had in our lives, we actually are more empowered to make choices driven by faith or by hope or by logic than if we ignore that we've experienced loss or trauma altogether. We have to look back. We have to face what it once was. And though we would never choose that loss, we do not have to choose to become less. This is so important. You and I, we can become more by having less. You and I, we both can become more as we experience having less. One of the great privileges of my job is I get to be with people in the reality of the darkest moments of life. I've been with people in grief. I have attended and ministered at funerals, and I've seen that very natural response of people they've heard the platitudes, right? God, I know you make everything work together for good. I know that you have a plan for this, but honestly, I'm not interested in that right now. I just want my wife back. I just want my boy back. Where you're at today, God, I know you work everything together for good, and God, I know that you have a hope and a plan for me, but honestly, I don't care. I just want my job back. I just want stability back. As I've seen people honestly go through those emotions, and there's nothing wrong with those emotions. In this, even, Job was worshiping. I've also seen some people who make strategic choices in the midst of that, continue through it, continue paying attention to how it feels, but also paying attention to a God that can't help but give all the way down that chute. And when they land at the bottom of that grief, they actually land stronger than before they fell. They land more full of hope than when they fell. They land more present and compassionate to the pain of others than when they fell. This is what's available to us in a season of loss if we grieve well. We'll become more aware of what matters most in life than before we fell. We may have less, but we together will become more. So, what do you do with this? Well, you might be falling down a chute right now. All of us are falling down a chute of some sort, but some of you, you're feeling it big time right now. So you have a choice. Will you continue with ungrieved loss? That's a choice you have. You don't have to grieve the loss. The loss is forced on you, but you don't have to grieve it. And something's going to grow in that soil for sure. Maybe you've had some of it from the past. For instance, chronic complaining is going to grow in that soil. You're going to have a hard time seeing the bright side of anything. A guarded heart is going to grow in ungrieved soil. I don't know if I want to open myself up again. I want to take a risk again. Resentment is going to grow in that ungrieved soil. God, not only do I not like what you did, I don't like you any longer, and I can't trust you anymore. Resentment of other people who made choices that you want to blame for your current circumstances. Isolation definitely can grow in ungrieved soil. I'm all alone in this. Nobody's going to get it. Some of you right now, you need help and you haven't reached out. You haven't clicked on the link on radius.la/next and sought help through our people-to-people connection point there. You need help. There are people available to help. You are not alone. Some of you in that ungrieved soil, you're just going to grow repressed emotions. Like, I'm not stressed. And then you're going to lash out at your wife or your dog. You know, you're not going to be honest about how you feel or even attached to how you really feel. That's a choice. But there's another choice that I want to invite you into, and that is to live through a grieved loss. Grieving is receiving from the season that you're leaving, and I hope you choose it. I hope I choose it because so many things grow in this, and I think we want them more. Peaceful appreciation grows. I'm so grateful for what I have and what I once had. What a life to have had what I've had. An open heart grows in grieved loss. God, I'm open to what you want to do in this next season. I'm open to new relationships. I'm open to deeper intimacy. Contentment grows in grieved loss. I'm pleased with what I have. In Jesus, I actually have enough. I have everything that I need and some of what I want. Connection grows in grieved loss. You actually grow closer to people as you experience sadness together. Finally, expressed emotions. Honesty about your emotions. Emotional intelligence grows in a grieved loss. I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling really scared right now. I'm feeling really nervous right now, but I don't have to let that drive my decisions. As we often say, feelings are real, but they're seldom true. That's the kind of maturity that grows in a grieved loss. So I want to really quickly land this for all of us who are experiencing loss and all of us who have an opportunity to hold space for people who are grieving a loss right now. If you don't know, Job actually had some well-meaning friends. It wasn't just his wife telling him to shrivel up and die. He had some friends who started off well. And in verse 12 of Job chapter 2, it says, when they saw Job from a distance, knowing what he'd just gone through, the atom bomb that went off in his life, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and they threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. Even though they didn't experience it firsthand, their friend was. So they joined him as best they could. This is so important. They became devastated with him. Then it goes on to say, they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word. Smartest thing they did, the whole story. You'll notice here very soon, if you keep reading Job's story, that then they started opening their mouths and it went downhill from there. But no one said a word for a week to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. Did you catch that? His suffering was too great for words. I can't explain this away. I can't tie this up in a neat little bow. There's not one little Bible verse that helps check this off the list and you're going to feel okay about it. I can't make sense of this. You can't make sense of this. The grief is just too great for words. It needs something more powerful than our words. I've been a pastor, like I said, for a few years, and as I've walked through people through these seasons of loss, I have learned and am learning and imperfectly applying how to create this kind of space with people. people that are walking through the throes of divorce or the loss of a job. And rather than explain it, rather than try to give them a why or just flippantly say has a plan for this and he'll work everything out together for good. While that is true, the timing is horrible. And I have found so much power in just sitting with, because some of what grows in that grieved loss is the interconnection that we have as a humanity, as a human species. Someone within Radius, actually on Facebook, just a few months ago in early October, shared something very vulnerable, and I asked her permission to share this with everyone here online. She said, and I'll just quote her from her Facebook post, "I discovered that I was having a miscarriage. Just 2 weeks before, I had seen the heartbeat, and the next appointment, there was none." Some of you know this pain firsthand. She goes through some of the tragic, painful details of what that felt like and where her mind was going in that time. But then she brings it to a close with this. This is so powerful. "I'm writing this for 2 reasons. 1, I had other voices with a similar experience. 2, if it weren't for my relationship with Jesus and the hope I have, knowing that he truly has all things planned out for our best and for his glory, which in turn brings me so much joy and strength, I wouldn't be standing so strong today. He brought me earthly relationships that met my physical needs, and he brought me internal peace I literally cannot explain. I'm still dealing with the grief of loss, but more importantly, I'm experiencing a greater joy in relationships I have formed with people who've also gone through grief. If we go through this pain, I will praise his name because he's revealed so much more to me, and he knows his perfect timing." So here's what we need to do. If someone around you is going through change or going through loss, and frankly everybody is, first show up. I've talked more and Zoomed more with my parents in the last 2 weeks than I probably have in the last 2 years. Sorry, Mom and Dad. There's a friend who doesn't live close to you, and maybe this is a chance to reconnect and just hold space together. Someone around you that might be putting on a brave face, but you know life has changed and it's not feeling good for them right now. Show up. Then, and this is going to seem like an odd suggestion first, I want you to speak up, but speak up only with the best words. And here's some of them. I'm here with you. I love you. I'm heartbroken with you. Here's good words. Be specific so you're not giving people in grief a homework assignment. I'm going to Zoom with you at 6 p.m. Thursday night. If that doesn't work for you, then I'm going to try it Friday at 6 p.m. I'm going to send burritos through Postmates tonight. Be specific about ways that you want to serve them and help them. Finally, and this is going to seem like an oxymoron, shut up. Show up, speak up, but shut up. And what I mean by that is fight the urge that we all have to explain it. Fight the urge to tell them platitudes and simple answers to complex problems. Fight the urge to say stupid things when someone loses a loved one, like God needed another angel. No, he doesn't. That's stupid. People of faith say stupid things sometimes. This is not the time to say stupid things, so shut up. What I hope and pray, and actually know to be true from experience, is this community, even the one that's forming now online and building online, this community is actually one of the best places to experience loss together because we hold space for real grief. It doesn't scare us. We are people who live with a cross and a resurrection. We can be honest about grief and hope in the same place. We can hold that paradox together because God has so much to give us. When we're in grief, we don't need platitudes or simple answers. What we ultimately need is what we've needed all along. We need presence. It's better than words. We need the presence of God in our lives, and we need each other's presence in our lives. Now, what I want to do is, and this may feel strange across a screen here, but I just want to contemplate this together. This is a form of prayer. If you're comfortable with this, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to hold out your hands. I often do this when I'm praying because this is my body telling my soul that God's up to something. This is a posture of giving and receiving. God, I give you this, and I'm also receiving. So I give you my loss and grief, my confusion and pain, and I'm open to receiving from you what you want to fill in to replace it, the deeper, stronger, enduring thing you want to give me. So you might want to close your eyes, hold your body like this. And at first, I just want you, in whatever words you can muster or what you can imagine, just to be real about how this feels. If it feels good, be honest about that. If right now feels worse, be honest about that. Some of you might even be feeling it in places in your body right now. You have a hard time opening your hands because you just want to clench your fists. You might even feel shortness of breath or your heart rate go up. It's okay, that's a part of it. Just feel it. And now there might be something you want to say to God. Be as honest as you know how to be to him. This is an act of worship. God, I can't believe you did this. God, I'm not happy that you did this. God, I'm so confused. Where are you going next? God, I don't know if you're there. Be honest with him. And then I want to say something between me and God right now. And if these words sound like you want them coming out of your mouth too, then you can use them. Maybe you put this in your own words. But as I close, God, I trust that in the soil of loss, you do your best work. It's in the graveyard, God, that you can bring resurrection. There's something I once had I do not have any longer in my life. But that doesn't mean you're done giving. Deepen my trust in you beyond my feelings, so that I trust a God who loves to give, that even when he takes away, it is to only give me something more. May I trust your character, even when, Lord, I don't understand your choices. Thank you for loving us, and thank you for wanting more for us than we settle for. In our grief, we pray this in the name of Jesus, who gave himself up for us. Amen.